Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 783, The Birds Begun at 4 o'clock. Now this is going to be a poem about the birds singing from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. We're back in many ways to poem 13 and the question of whether Emily is an early riser or not. We know, guys, that she spent a lot of time writing these poems in the early morning hours. But how early morning, and to some degree, is she enjoying the notion of her father waking her up? Well, you'll remember our study of poem 13. Of course, think about birds. Think about how Emily is identifying with the birds regularly in her poems. Our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist. Hopefully you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 782 poems. We just finished with 782. There is an arid pleasure. And if you've done that, you know Emily, the great lover of nature, that will often use nature as an exemplar in some ways of the poetic life that she herself is trying to lead. For example, I think a whole lot of this poem, we have standing behind it Shelley's To a Skylark. You'll remember our study at learnstrong.net of that poem, in the way in which Shelley argues that the bird sings without any kind of reason to be doing the singing. In other words, it just enjoys singing for the sheer pleasure of it all. Now, I find it amazing that a contemporary of Emily's is, of course, Henry David Thoreau, who you'll remember, we've given full lectures on this passage. You'll remember what he had to say in Walden, where I lived and what I lived for. You'll remember this passage. He says it this way: the morning, which is the most memorable season of the day, is the awakening hour. Then there is least somnolence in us, and for an hour at least some part of us awakes, which slumbers all the rest of the day and night. Little is to be expected of that day, if it can be called a day, to which we are not awakened by our genius, but by the mechanical nudgings of some servitor, are not awakened by our own newly acquired force and aspirations from within, accompanied by the undulations of celestial music, instead of factory bells and a fragrance filling the air, to a higher life than we fell asleep from. And thus, the darkness bear its fruit and prove itself to be good no less than the light. That man who does not believe that each day contains an earlier, more sacred and auroral hour than he has yet profaned, has despaired of life, and is pursuing a descending and darkening way, after a partial cessation of his sensuous life. The soul of man, or its organs rather, are reinvigorated each day, and his genius tries again what noble life it can make. All memorable events, I should say, transpire in morning time and in a morning atmosphere. The Vedas say all intelligences awake with the morning. Poetry and art and the fairest and the most memorable of the actions of men date from such an hour. All poets and heroes, like Memnon, are the children of Aurora and emit their music at sunrise. To him whose elastic and vigorous thought keeps pace with the sun, the day is a perpetual morning. It matters not what the clocks say or the attitudes and labors of men. Morning is when I am awake, and there is a dawn in me. Moral reform is the effort to throw off sleep. Why is it that men give so poor an account of their day if they have not been slumbering? They are not such poor calculators. If they had not been overcome with drowsiness, they would have performed something. The millions are awake enough for physical labor, but only 1 in a million. Think of this. Emily is writing the poem we're about to study when Thoreau is writing this very line. Only 1 in a million, he says, is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion. Only 1 in 100 millions to a poetic or divine life. To be awake is to be alive. I've never yet met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? And then, of course, the most famous lines, right, from 303 especially, we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of a man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue and so to make a few objects beautiful, but it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do to affect the quality of the day. That is the highest of arts. Every man is tasked to make his life even in its details, worthy of the contemplation of his most elevated and critical hour. If we refused or rather used up such paltry information as we get, the oracles would distinctly inform us how this might be done. I find it compelling that Emily Dickinson will write the poem we're about to study as, of course, Thoreau is playing. Notice he mentions the Vedas. Of course, the Bhagavad Gita comes to mind here, especially Book 2, and we'll get to that at the end of all of this. Let's enjoy now her version of what happens in the early morning with the birds singing. And of course, I'm giving this lecture now in early May of 2026, when we're hearing all kinds of birds singing, especially in Ruthie's tree right outside our window here. The birds begun at 4 o'clock, their period for dawn. A music numerous as space, but neighboring as noon. I could not count their force, their voices did expend, as brook by brook bestows itself to multiply the pond. Their witnesses were not, except occasional man in homely industry arrayed to overtake the morn. Nor was it for applause that I could ascertain, but independent ecstasy of deity and men. By 6, the flood had done. No tumult there had been of dressing or departure, and yet the band was gone. The sun engrossed the east, the day controlled the world. The miracle that introduced, forgotten as fulfilled. Now, Emily will use the word miracle in 12 of her poems. We'll study a few more of them. You'll remember it for the first time when we hit 302. We'll go back to it a bit. But we'll begin with the birds beginning at 4 in the morning. That is to say, this precious time for Emily. Clearly, it's a precious time for her. She, sounding very much like the Thoreau passage we just read, is going to use the morning as an exemplar. That is to say, the birds are singing, so I must as well. You get a sense that it's possible that she wrote this poem as she was listening to the majestic miracle of the birds singing. Notice their period for dawn, notice capitalized dawn, a music numerous as space. Now, can we please point out that numerous is normally not what we equate with space, unless you want to talk about all the notes of the birds. And in that regards, again, we're back to Shelley and his skylark, but neighboring as noon. In other words, it's ubiquitous. We grow accustomed to it, don't we? We pointed this out in our study of To a Skylark, that we know it's amazing that a little tiny voice, a little tiny throat can develop and engender so much amazing noise and song and music, and yet we kind of take it for granted. Maybe the way, if we're not careful, we can take for granted the great poets and their poetry, right? I could not count their force, notice capitalized. Maybe the force may be the word of the poem along with miracle. Their voices did expend as, notice the similes here, as brook by brook bestows itself to multiply the pond. Again, the idea of bestowing itself, right? Giving itself. We go back to our study of Gibran's prophet and that passage that we've given a lecture over. We've given full lectures on the prophet. The tree that gives its fruit and doesn't demand anything of it. Notice here, it's much like the brooks. Notice it's brook by brook. By the way, pay attention to the way that she uses words that have the same first letter. We'll see it later in the poem. To multiply the pond, of course, I can't help but read this, and it's the reason I started with Thoreau. And what was the name of the pond, if not Walden, right? Their witnesses were not. In other words, there was nobody else. She says, at 4 in the morning, there was nobody else except me listening to the song of these birds, except occasional man in homely industry arrayed to overtake the morn. In other words, occasionally there might be somebody up who has to get up to go to work, and on his way is maybe going to hear it. Nor was it, the song of the birds is the antecedent, for applause. In other words, we're back to poem 779, the service without hope is tenderest, I think, because 'tis unsustained by scent, rewarded work, has impetus of gain and impetus of goal. There is no diligence like that knows not an until. In other words, the singing of birds is doesn't worry about any until, right? And then she'll say it. She says, I couldn't ascertain, but independent ecstasy. Ecstasy, for Emily, used in 27 of her poems, of deity and men. Deity and men makes us think, of course, of our study of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. By the way, a variant of deity was actually universe. And then all of a sudden it's done. By 6, the flood had done. Of course, it's fun to comment on the flood, right, as being the brook by brook, right? No tumult there had been. Tumult, of course, a word that can even make us think about war. Think about the fact that Emily is writing this poem during the worst catastrophic war in America's history. Of dressing or departure, notice again the use of the D word, and yet the band was gone. The band is in the music, or it could be the band is in the cohort, and it can be joined with tumult to think about the power of the war. And then all of a sudden she finishes with more nature references. The sun engrossed the east, the day controlled the world. The balance of this poem is majestic. And then she'll say it, the miracle that introduced, forgotten, as fulfilled. Again, the F words here to mirror the D words of the previous stanza's line of dressing or departure. Now, our use of the word miracle, I think, is significant. You'll remember it for the first time when we did 302. Like some old-fashioned miracle, when summertime is done, seems summer's recollection in the affairs of June, as infinite tradition as Cinderella's bays, or Little John, or Lincoln Green, or Bluebeard's galleries. Her bees have a fictitious hum. Her blossoms like a dream elate us, till we almost weep, so plausible they seem. Her memory is like strange review. When orchestra's dumb, the violin and be as replaced, and ear and heaven numb, the old-fashioned miracle. You'll remember it in 342, and 468, and 499, and 721, and 728, all those referencing miracles. When we get to 984, we're going to come back to this use of this word. 'Tis anguish grander than delight, 'tis resurrection pain, the meeting bands of smitten face we questioned to again. 'Tis transport wild as thrills the graves when cerements let go, and creatures clad in miracle go up by 2 and 2. When we get to 1017, she'll say it this way, to die without the dying and live without the life. This is the hardest miracle propounded to believe. And then we'll see miracle again in 1102. We'll see it in 1258. She'll say it this way, who were the Father and the Son, we pondered when a child, and what had they to do with us? And when, portentous told with inference appalling, by childhood forfeited, we thought at least they are no worse than they have been described. Who are the Father and the Son, did we demand today? The Father and the Son himself would doubtless specify, but had they the felicity when we desired to know? We better friends had been perhaps than time assured to be. We start to learn that we believe but once entirely. Belief, it does not fit so well when altered frequently. We blush that heaven if we achieve, event ineffable, we shall have shunned until ashamed to own the miracle. Finally, for the last time in 1626, she'll say, no life can pompously pass away the lowest career, to the same pageant wins its way as that exalted here. How cordial is the mystery, the hospitable Paul this way beckons spaciously. A miracle for all will be the last time that she uses it. What are we going to say at 2a about this poem? I think her argument is that true artists or poets, like the birds, sing for their own sake and nothing more. At 2b, well, I mean, there's all kinds of amazing, can I say miraculous, games being played here. The rhymes, notice all discordant, dawn, noon, expend, pawn, man, morn, ascertain, men, been, gone, world, fulfilled. Conveying, one scholar calls it the slight perplexity of the poet. There are numerous examples of phonic repetition in the lines. Notice alliteration. Birds begun, force, numerous, neighboring, noon, could, count, brook, bestows, witnesses, were, man, morn, done, dressing, departure, day, been, band, forgotten, fulfilled. There's examples of assonance. Music, numerous, could, brook, homely, overtake, mourn, nor, independent, ecstasy, min, flood, done, and of course consonants as well. Numerous, space, there, force, there, expend, multiply, pond, was, applause, ascertain, ecstasy, independent, men, engrossed, east, controlled, world, miracle, fulfilled. It is quite quite a remarkable thing that she's doing here. It says she's inspired by the birds in some powerful way. At 3, well, of course, we mentioned Shelley Skylark. I can't help but read this and think about our study of the Bhagavad Gita, Book 2. You have the right to work, but for the work's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of your labor. Desire for the fruits must never be your motive in working. Never give way to laziness either. We could expand that to you have the right to sing, but for the singing's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of your singing. Finally, at 3b, when was a time that you sang only for the song? When was a time that you studied only for the study? And is it possible that's this work you're doing now with us on our way to poem 1775? Thank you.